What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 779. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada, it's Paul Cheon. Paul, how's winter treating you out there in the desert?
You know, it's surprisingly getting drier. I thought it would be. I was really concerned about the dry heat in the summertime, but now we had to buy like 4 or 5 humidifiers around the house just to prevent from withering away into nothing. But hopefully our bodies will adjust, because other than that, we like it here. But it's a pretty bad thing that's happening right now, so I'm trying to get over it.
Yeah, that is tough. We don't need the whole Chi entourage to turn into dust out there. That's I remember, Paul and I have been doing Pro Tour coverage together for years now, and we've gone to Vegas and places like that, and it always did affect you. I remember multiple times where you were like, oh man, I've got to get some lotion, like my lips feel chapped and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I guess it is actually winter that ends up being the driest down there for sure. Well, I'm glad you're still with us. You haven't turned into dust just yet. You had a big weekend of Magic. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Sealed also, and we're going to talk about an archetype that I have some questions about as well here in Foundations, all on the show today. Before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. And you get a thank you card and a sticker for supporting us, and it means a lot. It's really kind of the bedrock for the show, and it has been for a very long time. So thanks to everybody who supports us there. We're also supported by Ultimate Guard. If you need gifts for your Magic playing friends, ultimateguard.com. Check it out. They've got everything over there. I like to go over and check out the site every once in a while just so I can keep up on all the products that they have coming out and stuff. They recently came out with a product called Squaros, which are kind of like a mix between a deck box and a collectible, where you can get different branded ones. They have SpongeBob SquarePants. Paul, did you watch SpongeBob when you were a kid, or are you too old for that?
I think I'm a little bit too old, but I do know the song for the most part.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm way too old for SpongeBob, but you can get, a SpongeBob Squareo. Again, it's like a branded deck box or whatever. You can get Gary, whatever your favorite character is. And they have them from a whole bunch of different things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I'm definitely not too old for. They have them for Foundations, Magic stuff. So, Liliana, that kind of stuff. So anyway, Ultimate Guard, they have everything you need: deck boxes, card sleeves, binders, Squaros, all of it over there. And you can pick up your favorite ones at your local game store or at your favorite online retailer. Thank you, Ultimate Guard, for your support of the show. We do appreciate it. We also like to answer a question every week from our patrons. This is one of the things that you get for being a patron of the channel, and we really appreciate everybody on our Patreon who puts in questions for the Patreon Question of the Week and for the Q&A shows that we do and when we have guests and all that kind of stuff. So our Patreon Question of the Week comes from Grayson, who says, with the number of draftable sets coming out increasing, do you ever think you'd reduce your coverage of a, quote, main set to focus on sets or other topics you find more interesting? As an example, if the Spider-Man set is shallow or boring, would you cut a number of episodes short to make room for other sets that you want to do more episodes of? This is an interesting question because we've never actually had to face this before, where if there's going to be a set that's out that's supplemental, we will have to, sometimes we'll go over and talk about those. Like if they come out with an MH3 or, some Modern Master set or something along those lines that people are going to be drafting. And if they're available most everywhere, like at the online platforms plus real life, those will sometimes take away from whatever the main set was. But that's been a rarity. Usually they kind of carve out a chunk of time where those can exist and not overlap too hard. And I'm assuming that that's what's going to happen here as well. Paul used to work at Wizards of the Coast. I mean, those are very smart people there. And I guess there could be a strategy where they just spam so many sets that they just figure as long as you land somewhere on one of them, as a drafter, you're doing fine. But I wouldn't assume that as the baseline strategy, marketing wise or set release wise. I would assume that they will give us some room to draft and enjoy these sets and then come out with the next one that kind of replaces it. Do you have any sense for that? I know you don't know anything about these ones, but do you have any sense for that?
I mean, I would be surprised if they, well, maybe not surprised, but there's, like you said, there's a bunch of smart people that work there. They don't want their sets to kind of cannibalize on itself.
Right.
So when something comes out, they're going to give it at least a good 2 months for people to kind of get the cards and get familiar with the set. So I would be a little bit surprised if they kind of get to the point where you're seeing one set a month come out, because then that's too much, right? If a set comes out every month, we're barely going through the rares and mythics before spoilers start coming out for the next set. But even with this year, it's something like 5 or 6 sets, something along those lines. I feel like giving a set around 2 months is a pretty good time, right? Because once we get to month number 3, we're starting to reach for topics, or because by that point everybody's done enough drafts, they really understand the format. So I think even the current pace that we're going is pretty good, especially for people like us who are creating content. When I do make the draft videos, there's a pretty big fall off after the second month where people are like, you know what, I've seen what I needed to see. Yeah. Right? I've seen what I needed to see. Let's move on. So if they push it even more, that would be problematic, but I just don't see that happening too often. We have a little bit of an overlap that's going to be happening soon with the release of Pioneer Masters, but that's an arena only thing. So it's one of those things where not everybody's going to be interested in it. So that's something where kind of we have the decision as to whether or not we want to explore that. Whereas if somehow Pioneer Masters was coming out and it was also coming out in real life, that would be a problem because Foundations hasn't even been out for a month. But that's not a problem that we're running into. So
right. Yeah. And I would say there's 2 big picture things that I would say about this. The first one Paul alluded to, which is that in order to make a Magic set, there's a significant amount of resources that go into that, and they need to get it back, right? Like all the R&D time, the marketing, the push, the packaging, everything that goes into releasing a set that actually gets put out to the public. You know, as the R&D team looks at how the set did and what happened, you know, if they put out so many that they're just trampling over their own product over and over and over again. And also there's been some pushback in the community about how many sets have come back, and that could get even worse if they really ran with it. That just doesn't make sense to me. So that's the first thing, is that there's an incentive that's built into how they build these sets, that like the amount of resources they put in, they can't just throw that away. They can't have this, they can't put in, you know, 4 months of time from the whole entire R&D thing and then have the set come out for a month. Like that's unsustainable and it won't work. So I wouldn't assume that's how that will go. The other big picture point is about us, which is, you know, the whole reason this podcast exists in the first place is to help you as a listener get better and enjoy Magic more. And we feel that there's 2 things: that winning is a pursuit in and of itself, and that Magic is more enjoyable when you're winning if you're a competitive player. And that means that we're trying to arm you with the information that we have, you know, to help you get better at card evaluation, deck building, gameplay, all of it. We want you to improve across the board at Limited and to reach whatever goals you set for yourself, whether it's, you know, becoming a profitable player on Arena, whether it's qualifying for a PT, whether it's taking it even to a higher level than that. And so what that means is that our goal is to anticipate your needs. So we kind of go where our listeners go, because that's what we're here for. It's not really about what we want to talk about. You know, if I let Luis run wild, he would just talk about Vintage Cube all day, right? All day. I mean, that's his thing, right? And, you know, and so, you know, for us, it's about tailoring it, you know, to your needs as the listener. And that's what we would do in these sets. Where are people going? What are people talking about? Where's the focal point? What, you know, a good question would be, what's the Arena Open? What's the format for the next Arena Open? Right? Because those are kind of the big flagpole moments that we get as the year goes by, right? Because those are, for most of us, I'm on that list, by the way, those are the highest stakes tournaments that I get to play in, right? Because maybe when GPs get rolling again, I'll get to bang around at a couple of those again, but it's not likely, you know? And, you know, for the most part, these Arena Opens are the thing that I look forward to the most on the competitive scene for me and the way that it fits my life. And I assume that a lot of our listeners, that's true as well. So what the answer to Grayson's question ultimately is, we're going to go where you go. So, you know, we're going to have to keep our tabs on the community and our listenership to figure out where it is that they're playing, what they're playing. And we're going to try to meet you where you need to be met to meet our goals as a show, which is to help you improve. Thank you for the question. That's really good. We've got 2 Crack-A-Packs to do here, Paul. These are so good early. The Crack-A-Packs early format are just such great conversation starters. So let's just dive in. First card up is Tranquil Cove. That's the blue-white gain land. I've really liked the gain lands in this set. I've been taking them pretty highly. I would say 4th, 5th, 6th isn't that uncommon for me to snap up one of these gain lands.
Yeah, no, really solid one. And this is one of the best ones just because blue-white is one of the strongest archetypes. So very, very happy picking it up. Also, just the white gain lands are a little bit better in the sense that you could also just randomly get minor life gain synergies or payoffs, right? Let's say you're just playing a blue-white deck and you have a Johnny's Pridemate in your deck, right? You just play this and all of a sudden you get a little extra boost. So I do love playing these. I like them significantly more than Evolving Wilds. The life gain is relevant, and there's a lot of double pipped cards that exist in this format, and having a land that can produce both types of mana is actually very, very, very important. So yeah, do like this. I wouldn't want to first pick it, of course, but I do like this as kind of a middle of the pack type card if this produces the colors that you need.
Yeah, the set's been interesting as far as the commons go. I think in the last set, if I had to take any common, I was kind of sad. I would much rather look towards the powerful uncommons that kind of led the way as far as power level and direction. But this set is a little different. It is the same. The uncommons and particularly the rares definitely rule the day. But there are a number of commons that I'm like, yeah, sure. If I have to take one of the removal spells, of which there are many, by the way, and they're very, very good in this format. And I think that that's what's kind of keeping this format in check. But if I have to take one of those, I'm okay with that. I'll take a Bake into a Pie, a Banishing Light, a Stab, definitely a Burst Lightning, and just move on with my life and feel fine about it. I don't feel robbed if I have to take a Burst Lightning first. That's a really good, flexible, powerful card that goes into multiple archetypes. So that does make the draft a little more interesting. You have to pay attention to the commons at least somewhat, even if you're not necessarily hoping to take one of them. Tolarian Terror is next. Have you been able to make this work? That's a 6 and a blue 5/5 that costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery in your yard, and it has Ward 2.
So sadly, I have not. And this is one of the creatures I was really excited to play with because it was really, really good in Dominaria when you can kind of draft the spells deck. But sadly, the spells deck is one of the weaker archetypes so far. And there's a couple of refactors for it. It's not hard to be able to get this into your spells deck, and you can sometimes play it for 4 mana or whatever. But there's just a ton of ways to kind of chump block on the ground. The removal also seems to be stronger. So there's just a lot of ways you can kill it with Luminous Rebuke. You can kill it with Banishing Light. You can kill it with Eaten Alive, Bake into a Pie. There's just a million ways to kill it and also block. There's just we're talking about a world full of Infestation Sages and Helpful Hunters and Burglar Rats. There's just infinite ways to kind of keep this in check. So even in a decent spells deck, I think it's fine, but I'm never taking it too highly. There are certainly decks. If I'm playing a Blue Red spells deck and I'm playing 12 spells, yes, I'll still play this card in my deck, but it's not the ultimate blue payoff creature that it once was.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I have put it into blue-black. I've put it into blue-red for sure. And it's okay. Like that's the peak. It's just okay.
Right.
Even when you're paying 1 or 2 mana, it just feels all right. Next is, there it is, Infestation Sage. Very good common. Black, 1/1. It is an elf, by the way. And when it dies, you get a 1/1 flyer. Card's been really solid, particularly good in red-black for the sacrifice stuff, but it plays well in every color. Like there isn't a deck I wouldn't put this into.
Yeah, just a super solid card, especially if you are, it's a black, here's the thing. It's a black common, right? And the black is where all the sacrifice stuff mostly happens. So it just slots in perfectly. If this was a white common, it would still be good, but it would be worse, right? Just because that's not necessarily what white's trying to do all the time.
Right.
But because of the fact that this is a black common, this card is just incredible and probably would be the card that I'd be taking so far.
Yeah, same. I also just like it. I think it's a good design, just simple. Any card that dies and then upgrades itself is kind of more interesting on the board. Like you're like, wow, do I actually want to let that? Like people will just chump with a Sage just to get a flyer going, and I think that that's a cool little subtlety. Next is Sower of Chaos. That's the 3 and a red 4/3, and you can pay 2 and a red to have target creature not be able to, or not block this turn, not be able to block this turn. Not a big fan.
Yeah, I don't play this one all that often. It's fairly vanilla. The cost is just too expensive. It's your quote unquote mana sink, but at what point are you ever actually going to be able to utilize this ability and not put yourself behind? It's probably the turn you're maybe winning the game.
Right.
And so for that reason, I think maybe if you just need a random 4 power, 4 mana creature in your Gruul deck and you don't have any 4 drops, you can kind of slot it in. But this is kind of a D level card, and so not too excited about this one.
Very, very solid D.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the design. I mean, I like getting up to 4 power for that deck, and I like a mana sink. It's just mana sinks have gone way down in importance over time. There was a time where they were really important, and you really did kind of need somewhere to put your mana because flooding out was very common, but and not being able to do anything. That hasn't been the case for a while. Generally speaking, limited has changed enough that you have stuff to do with your mana. I have lost to this card, but it's never really felt like that big of a deal. Next is Macabre Waltz. Just okay. 1 and a black.
Yeah.
Sorcery, return up to 2 charted creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then you discard a card. So you can just get back like a creature and discard the other, even if you're empty-handed and you top deck this. But yeah, it's just okay. I like formats where Macabre Waltz is good, and this is one where it's just very mid. It's just, like you can run one if you have to, but there's just nothing really interesting to do with it.
Right. I mean, if you have a deck with a bunch of cheap creatures in it and you're anticipating things going into the graveyard and trading, and you need a card to kind of just get you some gas back, or if you have some rare creatures that you'd like a little more redundancy and having that recursion is important, then you'll value this a little bit higher. Noting, because I've made this mistake also, is just be mindful of the lands that you play, especially in the late game. If you think about playing land number 6, maybe you should just hold it if this card is in your deck. Just because when you draw the Macabre Waltz and you're empty-handed, you're just like, why did I play this land that I absolutely didn't have to? So that's just one extra thing that you need to consider, because of course you have to discard a card when you're getting creatures back with this.
Yeah, this is an aside, but it's along the lines that you're saying. This is actually one of the most hold the extra land formats I think we've ever had. Like, there are Macabre Waltz is one reason. If you're playing against black, they could have a rat, and that's a common. They just top deck it late and they nab your expensive card, and there was no reason for it, so just keep that land. And then there's a lot of looting. There's a lot of when this enters a battlefield, draw a card, discard, or it gives you the option to rummage or something like that. There's a lot of that just sort of woven into the fabric of this format, and I find that like after land 6 or whatever, I often just keep them in hand. Next is. This poor card. This is Wary Thespian. This is the 1 and a green 3/1, and when it enters or dies, you surveil 1. I mean, this is a hostile environment for the Thespian. It still sees play, like it hasn't eradicated it from the battlefield, but man, this thing faces down a lot of rats, a lot of infestation sages.
Yeah, the nice thing about this is just the ETB and leave the battlefield surveil effect, which obviously allows you to sculpt your hand, help you find the land that you need, right? If you keep a 2-lander with this one, it always feels great. But yeah, they definitely feel like they get a little bit worse in multiples, just because there are going to be matchups, particularly if you're playing against black, where they do have the Infestation Sage and Burglar Rat, where this card just doesn't look like the most exciting card to play. You're still going to play it in your green decks, probably the first copy at least, and it'll be a fine curve filler level card. But there are formats where this card plays out much, much better, and this is just isn't one of them. For example, in Duskmourn.
In Duskmourn, it was dope.
This card was great.
Yeah.
Wary Watchdog was a really, really great card because filling up your graveyard was powerful, and there weren't as many X1s that existed in the set. But of course, this format is different. So
it is. Yeah. I would just say set your expectations for Wary Thespian. It is not going to be one of the better cards in your deck, but you can make the cut. All right, here we go. Here's some business. Here's Banishing Light. 2 and a white enchantment. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield.
Yep.
Very good.
This is the one. Very simple. 3 mana, kill anything. And very, very happy to play this, of course. So
it tends to stick too. Green has a few ways to kill it. White does too. But for the most part, those are sideboard-ish cards at best. Go ahead.
This is just a format where main decking disenchant effects is just not that great. There's just not as many targets as there are in some other sets. So if you can't really, it's harder to justify even a card like Reclamation Sage in certain formats. It can be an all-star.
Yes,
I think it's actively bad to main deck in this format. There's just not enough targets.
No,
in a best of 3 environment, of course, obviously you take it and you put it in your sideboard. But I think for that reason, Banishing Light is a little bit better, just because less people will be able to deal with it at least game 1.
Yeah, the only card that I see regularly, because people I think have figured that out. About Rec Sage just being mediocre, but Make Your Move is a card that people do play. Somewhat, because it does kill like a bigger creature and there's enough of those around. But I mean, that's so narrow. Banishing Light tends to stick. Definitely the pick here. Last comment is Strix Lookout. This is a 1 and a blue, 1/2 flying vigilance, and you can pay 1 and a blue, tap it to loot.
I don't mind this card in blue decks.
It's
totally fine. It's kind of an annoying creature to have in play. And make sure that you kind of don't run out of gas in the late game, but you're never taking this high. It's just a really inefficient body. You don't want to overload on cards like this either. You want probably exactly 1, maybe 2, and that's kind of it. So Banishing Light's still the pick for me.
Yeah, this is a good one. That's a good lesson in the way that you just said, because I had a deck that had 4 of them. It also had 2 of the Imperial whatever, the one that pumps flyers. So I was just trying to be like all in on that. But it was really interesting because when I didn't have the 2/3 that pumps these things up, it was bad, right? They don't stack well because they're so expensive to activate and they're tiny. Like I just have all these, like I've put all these mana and cards in, and my board state is just getting ran over by a 3/3 or whatever, And so that's not, that really highlights it. And even though I had my reasons for running a bunch of them, it showed me what it would look like if I didn't have those justifications very clearly. And it was not pretty. Uncommons. First one is Goblin Negotiation. This is red X sorcery. It deals X damage to target creature, and you get a number of 1/1 goblins equal to the excess damage dealt to that guy. This card's just way too inefficient.
Yeah. There was a time in Magic where this card would have been awesome, where you're just like, oh, this card's great. Games go to turn 8 or 9. I can cast this for 5 and make 3 1/1s or whatever. But it just, in modern Magic, this is just, you're just paying way too much mana. You're paying 4 mana to deal 2 damage to something.
Right.
That is far, far too much. So maybe a better sealed deck card, just because sealed tends to be a little slower and you can get to game states where you have 6 or 7 mana in play. But this is also a format where, like you said, there's a lot of looting and other things as well. So oftentimes you want to kind of hold your lands. So I just don't see this. I've never played with this card personally. I've had people cast it and it'd be very mediocre. So not really interested in this one.
Yeah, same. And even the red-green deck doesn't want it. And it can make a lot of mana with Llanowar Elves and the rampant growth and all that kind of stuff. Next one I do like, it's Nessian Hornbeetle. If you're going to do green, the way to do it is red-green for Power Matters deck, and this is a nice little payoff for it. It's 1 and a green for a 2/2 at the beginning of combat. On your turn, it picks up a +1/+1 counter if you control a creature with power 4 or greater.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a super, super solid creature in specifically the red-green deck. There is just no shortage of 4 power things to be doing, and green, we talked about how it's kind of on the weaker end of the colors. It is widely considered to be the worst color. But specifically, the red-green color combination is one of the strongest archetypes because of the synergies between those 2 colors. The 4 power matters theme actually hits pretty well in this set. And so for that reason, cards that do key off of that, as long as you know that you're going to try to be a red-green deck or possibly maybe a mono green deck, but I wouldn't recommend that, then this card will be very, very strong.
Yeah, it asks not that much of you. It's pretty easy to get going and it gets huge. Next is an interesting one. It's Quake Strider Ceratops. That's the 3 green, 12/8. Like, that's it. That's the card. Luis and I actually like this card in the set review. Against our normal judgment, like normally just a whole bunch of power and toughness on a relatively hard to cast, somewhat expensive creature is not a recipe for success, but they really threw it. I mean, this is a 12/8. Like, it has 8 toughness. Like, even if it's just an 8/8, that's already really big. And this one is 12 power. Like, there's a lot of ways to get this guy through, get it trample for even half a second and the game probably ends. I will say, though, that I would not rate it as highly as we did. Not that we gave it some incredible grade or whatever, but I would have it lower than we did in the set review now in retrospect. And that's for two main reasons. One, green, as you mentioned, it's generally considered the worst color. And this is not its specialty. Like this, if you are going to go into green, it's actually for our next uncommon, more so than cards like this. And then the other reason is the removal. We're going to hit on this a few times over the course of this show, but the removal in Foundations is really good. I think it's one of the best removal suites we've seen in a while in a limited set. Cards like Banishing Light just stick around. There's a bunch of catch-all removal that floats around. There's flexible removal. There's stuff for small creatures. There's stuff for big creatures. And this one just gets chump blocked until they find their removal spell. And it's a recipe for... I kind of built my deck to cast this thing, and I didn't really get much of a payoff. So I was thinking that for once, a whole bunch of power and toughness would actually be enough, and it's not.
Yeah, this is just a format where having overstated vanilla creatures just doesn't do anything for you.
So bad.
And so if basically the way that I look at it is if you're going to play a 6-mana creature and it doesn't do anything the turn it hits play, it's probably pretty bad, right? We're talking about Shivan Dragon being very, very bad. Probably better than this, but Shivan Dragon is quite bad. This is quite bad. There's just so much good removal that exists in this format. Blue has 2 common bounce spells that trade up on mana as well. So this is just not something that you want to be doing. And here's a good example, right? Compare this to Guarded Air, which is 5 and a white for a 1/1 lifelinker. When it enters a battlefield, you make 2 3/3s. That card has a significantly higher win rate than the Ceratops, even though it's got far less total combined power and toughness, right? Because this comes into play and generates you 2 tokens, whereas the other card is just a standalone card that's just very easily dealt with by the plethora of removal that exists in this format. So yeah, again, if it's expensive and it doesn't do anything the turn it hits play, you probably shouldn't play it.
Totally. And that's a good comp. Here, this next one is too. Affectionate Indrik. Same amount of mana, vastly easier to cast. And you only get a 4/4 instead of a 12/8, but when it's 5 and a green, by the way. And when it enters the battlefield, you can have it fight target creature you don't control. And that comes up a lot. Like that kills a lot of relevant things, particularly flyers, right? There's a whole bunch of 3/3s, 3/4s, 2/3s, 2/2s, 1/2s, and it just picks off one of those and really helps you stabilize the board. And in an absolute pinch, you can use it to kill anything with 4 toughness as well, even if it ends up trading off. So, it just dunks on Quakestriders, Ceratops on like every level. It's like easier to cast, just better across the board. And that's where if you are going to be in green, that's where you need to be. You need to be ramping up to an Affectionate Indrik that helps you stabilize the board.
Yeah. Indrik, totally fine card. I remember when this card was really, really great back in the day, but I think now paying 6 mana for anything, you need to get a pretty good amount of value. And there are enough instances where this may not necessarily get all the things that you want, or it's a little inefficient, or there's good combat tricks where I don't have this as highly as I kind of rated it when it first came out in previous sets. So it's a fine card, but I would much rather have one of the cheaper removal spells that we saw before. For example, I would take Banishing Light over the Affectionate Indrik so far. Yeah,
same. And Indrik is paying perhaps a little bit of green tax here as well.
The green tax is real, yes.
Our rare is Swiftblade Vindicator. This is the red-white 1/1 double strike vigilance trample. This is a really interesting one to open here, Paul, because, red-white has been one of the decent decks in the format. Early on, it was kind of high up, and we'll talk about it in the main part of the show, but I took a look at the stats for the last week rather than basically 2 weeks. So cutting out that first week of play as things kind of were settling. And Boros still in that upper tier of decks, but it has dropped maybe just a little bit from where it was. Swiftblade Vindicator is the type of card that's like decent enough on its own, but if it's augmented in effectively any way whatsoever, like literally 1+1/+1 counter transfers this thing into just like a beast, and any combat trick, any equipment, anything like that means that this thing can really run rampant. But it's 2 colors and it's a 1/1. Like, this is a very vulnerable card, to it's a lightning rod if there ever was one, especially because you really do want to have this out on turn 2 if you can. Would you be willing to take a Swiftblade Vindicator like over a Banishing Light like in this pack?
No, I wouldn't. I just think Banishing Light's a better card in general.
Mm-hmm.
If I can see an instance where you are a very good red-white aggressive deck with a bunch of ways to put counters on this, and you have a combat trick where it could be better than Banishing Light, but first pick, first pack, it's just, you just don't know. And for me to take a multicolored card first, it has to be significantly better than the monocolored removal spell generic bake into a pie type card. And I don't think Vindicator gets there, just because by itself it's not good enough, right? By itself you're just it's but obviously with any kind of augmentation it's good and the upside is there, but it's not something where I would risk taking it first over a Banishing Light, which has a much higher likelihood of making it into my deck and just being one of the great removal spells that I need.
Yeah, I to me, there's multiple strikes against taking a Vindicator here. You've covered them. The fact that Banishing Light goes really, really well into a blue-white deck, right? You can play black-white with Banishing Light, no problem. Swiftblade Vindicator, one deck only. Like, you do not splash for Swiftblade Vindicator in any deck because it really wants to come down early and it needs a certain archetype around it. And then the other thing is the removal. Again, look, removal being good isn't a reason not to take good threats. That logic doesn't pan out, but it does pan out where, okay, I have to pay a significant setup cost to try to get this Swiftblade Vindicator drafted, pack 1, pick 1, and into my deck, and my mana has to be right, and everything has to kind of pan out. And then if the removal's really good against cards like this, where they will often just have a way to kill it, even if they kind of need to, that is a knock on it. Like, if this is the type of card that was really resilient to removal for whatever reason in the format and it got to just run wild, it would be much better. But it makes the card worse. Like, it is a worse card because of stab and because of burst lightning and stuff like that, where there's just this window where they get to kill the thing. And they do often, most of the time, I would say. So I'm with you. Out of this pack, I would take Banishing Light. My next pick would be Affectionate Indrik. I have liked it. It is a 2-for-1. It is a payoff. And I am more willing to draft green, I think, than the average drafter right now. That said, I'm not looking for excuses to do it, so I would take the Banishing Light here.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's take a look at our next pack and see what we get. Our first card out is Aegis Turtle. That's the blue 0/5. This is just not a playable, right? This is one of the few cards that you can just say, yeah, no, just don't do that, right?
I can tell you've never played with the card, Marshall, because it's a 0/6.
No, it's a 0/5.
Is it?
Yeah.
I can tell I've never played with this card.
Neither of us have ever played with it. That's incredible.
Turtle. Is it really an 05?
I think so. Yeah.
I would have played it if it was an 06. My bad.
Poor Aegis Turtle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Poor Aegis Turtle. It's like we were already slamming it.
I was trying
to
boost its toughness and still say it's bad.
Right.
But yes, so, you don't need to be playing this in your deck.
No, this doesn't really fit anywhere. This one I have played, Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves is still busted. It is the only really good green common, but it is really good. Like, it carries a lot of weight on its own. Anytime, especially if you're on the play and you go turn 1 Llanowar Elves and your opponent doesn't kill it, it is gross. Like, you get to do stuff that you're just not supposed to be able to get away with in Limited. The problem is that the support is weak. There isn't that much around it in its own color that is really great. If you do a turn 2 Beastkin Ranger, the 3/3 that can get bigger, that's okay. But you're not exactly lighting up the world. And then it does have that same problem that I just described, where it dies to stab and it dies to burst lightning pretty commonly. People know. People know, like, don't just let that Llanowar Elf sit there and curve you out and get way ahead. So, even with its potential upside, it's still, it has its issues in the format. And it's kind of stranded. Like I said, it really depends on what you get with it with other colors, right? Because green isn't helping it out that much.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely green's best common. And this shouldn't come as a surprise, but there's an opening hand win rate stat here, and Llanowar Elves is at 61.2%. So if you have Llanowar Elves in your opening hand, it's about as good as some of the best uncommons in the set because, of course, turn one Elves is absolutely outrageously powerful. And kind of if you get like I have a group here. In my Discord group, we have a channel for trophy picks, like picks that got you to 7 wins. And anytime I see a green deck, I just immediately put my eyes all the way to the left side of the screen and go, okay, all right, you got a trophy with how many Llanowar Elves do you have? And it's always 2 or 3.
It's always 2 or 3.
It's always 2 or 3.
Yeah. Next is Make Your Move, which we talked about. That's the 2 and a white instant destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. This does actually make the cut. You'll see this get played every once in a while, but I would call it a fringe playable.
Yeah, I've tried playing this a few times, and I have been a bit underwhelmed. There's obviously times where it's good, but just because the disenchant side of this card just isn't particularly great, I'll play this if I'm really lacking removal and I need to kind of have something like this. But on the flip side, and we're going to get to this later, this is a card I'm very happy main decking in sealed, but that's a different beast entirely.
Yeah. This to me describes the type. This is the type of card that I don't generally like to go for because what I feel like people do is they're looking for a target, right? If they find anything that they can hit with Make Your Move, they're like, we did it. Close enough. And I just don't think that that's a good bar to set. Like your removal spells are at a much higher bar. You're looking for a good target. You want to kill their best card. You want to kill the card that actually matters. You want to kill a card that's double blocking and you get a 2-for-1 out of it. You want to break up a combat trick or something, right? You're shooting for the sky with your removal spells, and Make Your Move is like, oh, thank God they played some crappy, whatever artifact, and I had a target. I actually got to get this card out of my hand. Like that's not to me a good place to be. Yes, if you get matched up with green or red, you're probably going to find a target with the power 4 or greater, and that's good. That's kind of the thing you're trying to do it for. But the truth is, this format has enough removal that you don't need to be reaching down into this kind of weird stuff. Macabre Waltz. Just talked about it. Next is Gnarlid Colony. This is the 1 and a green 2/2 with kicker for 2 and a green. And it says, if this creature was kicked, it has 2+1/+1 counters on it. And then this is like a separate static ability that people seem to forget about sometimes, but it says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample.
Yeah, I wish the +1/+1 counter strategy was a little better supported. I just don't see enough reasonable payoffs to putting a bunch of counters, and this one's okay. I mean, it's a fine card. You will almost always play this in your green decks just to put in your 2-mana slot, but it's not the most exciting card. It's fine in the late game too, but you're paying 5 mana for a 4/4 trample, which is also not the most impressive thing.
Right.
So you get kind of 2 mediocre creatures, but you get that flexibility, which is reasonable. But it's just kind of a middling green common. It's kind of on the level of Wary Thespian.
Right. I love the design, but yeah, it just ends up being 2 just okay cards smashed together. Next is Heir Apparent. That's the 1 and a white 2/2. And when it enters, you get a number of 1/1 White Rabbit creature tokens equal to a number of other creatures called Heir Apparent. And then it has, for us at least, Trinket text that can have any number of cards named Heir Apparent. We opened this last week. It's just not a thing. Like I have not found this to be good. Okay, here's an important common. This is a starred highlight common. This is Involuntary Employment. This is the 3 and a red sorcery, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, gains haste. And then this actually ends up being really kind of important. You get a treasure token. And like that treasure token is the difference a lot, right? Like I keep getting nabbed when they have the stupid 2-drop zombie and they just need that 1 extra mana. And I'm like, oh, well, oh crap, they get a treasure. Like they actually do get to sack my guy. That treasure token, getting that little rebate back on it, Involuntary Employment really does matter.
Yeah.
And it comes up a lot.
Yeah, it effectively makes it 3 mana, right? You just know that when you cast this, there are multiple 1 mana ways to sacrifice things in this format. The zombie being one of the most common ones, but there's also Eaten Alive, right? You can also just play this, use the treasure to then cast the Eaten Alive. So both are really, really strong. And this is particularly, I actually don't really play this in any other archetype, but it's basically a Rakdos card, right? It's a black-red card. This is a card that you actively want in your Rakdos decks, given you have a couple of Hungry Ghouls and some Eaten Alives and some other ways to sacrifice. Maybe a Vampire Gourmand. That would be nice too.
Right.
So that's kind of what you want. It has a very high win rate, specifically in red-black, because of that. But again, taking this early means you're kind of trying to move into the red-black deck, so you just have to be a little bit careful. I don't really take this early, just because you know you can get it kind of late if Rakdos is open.
That's kind of the point, right? It's effectively a gold card, and you're the only one that wants it, ideally. So this is a perfect chance to like take a good black or red removal spell or a good threat when this is in the pack. You know, let's say you're in pack 2 and you open it up and you really do want an involuntary employment, but you find, a burst lightning in there or something like that. You take the burst lightning and you just plan on wheeling the involuntary employment. If it doesn't come back, then you're not the only one in that deck. That's it, and then you might need to, adjust course a little bit, but that's the whole payoff, right? If you blow your pack 1, pick 1, or pack 2, pick 1, on involuntary employment over a good playable, you're not maximizing. Like this card is really made for that environment. Next is Witness Protection. It's blue for an enchantment and a chance a creature. The creature loses all abilities and is a 1/1 citizen.
It's pretty crazy how big of a difference that one power makes. Mm-hmm. And because I'm comparing this to Limited All-Star Unable to Scream in Duskmoor. Mm-hmm. Unable to Scream was fantastic. It was one of the best removal spells actually in the set. And because it effectively shut down a creature, but also that creature basically had no combat stats, right? An O2 is effectively a blank piece of cardboard on the battlefield, whereas something with 1 power is very relevant. There are a number of 1 toughness things that exist in the format. So if let's say you play Witness Protection on something and then you have a Cathar Commando in play, they can still just trade their 1/1 with your Cathar Commando. They can still hit you, right? You don't feel that bad, right? You don't feel that bad. Let's say you have kind of a slowish hand. You don't feel that bad on turn 2 playing Unable to Scream on their solid 2-mana creature. But when you cast a Witness Protection, you're still taking 1. And that makes a really, really big difference. So I don't value this as highly. And I don't mind this as much if I do need removal. And let's say I'm playing a blue-white Flyers deck, right? Where all I need to do is just get that Stair Spinner off the board or just find some way to push through damage and I can just attack in the air. But for example, in like a Dimir control deck, I would hate to play an effect like this.
Same.
Just because I already have access to, a ton of good removal spells. Not only that, this format is a format where sacrifice is very well supported. So when you use this on their creature, they can still use that resource to get value, right? They can sack the creature to do something with it, which makes a card like this worse.
It also it's not searchable with Micromancer.
Right?
It just feels so out of place, to have a random aura for blue, that you can't search up with a powerful common like that.
Yeah.
Not a fan of Witness Protection. Next is Empyrean Eagle. That's the one I was talking about earlier. The 1 blue, white, 2/3 flyer that gives other creatures you control with flying +1/+1. Really, really good in the blue-white deck. Blue-white deck's one of the better decks too. So
yeah, I mean, this is the second best of the signpost uncommons that exist. The Dreadwing Scavenger is, I think, by far and away the best performing uncommon in the set. But this is in one of the 2 best archetypes. I believe blue, white, and blue, black are the 2 best archetypes. And we talked about before in the previous pack where, hey, the Swiftblade Vindicator, not quite good enough for me to justify trying to take a risk and take that first pick. The Eagle is. And right now, I would take the Eagle over the Llanowar Elves.
I would too. Next is Slumbering Cerberus. This is the 1 in a red 4/2 that doesn't untap during your untap step, but it has Morbid if a creature died. At the beginning of each end step, this guy does untap. And it's important to note that it doesn't enter the battlefield tap, so you do get it on guard, as a blocker, even if nothing's going to be dying soon. And this is 2 mana for 4 power. Like, it is a lot. It hits hard. It goes really well in that red-green deck, that cares about 4 power. Just having another cheap, easy way to get the 4 power on the battlefield to start triggering stuff is really strong. But it is limited. You know, there are times I have seen people attack with this and then, well, let's just say the dog fell asleep for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is something that the nice thing about this, like you mentioned, just because it comes into play untapped, even if you kind of have a slowish deck, it's a 2-drop that just trades with something gigantic. It's almost got death touch, right? It's a decent blocker, and the fact that it keys off of it helps you with whatever 4-power synergies you may have, right? If you like, you can live the dream and play this turn 2 and play the green rare on turn 3, Sylvan Scavenging, and just make a 3/3 right away. That's pretty awesome. So I think this is just a solid creature, but not something that I would take over a premium removal spell or the Eagle or anything like that.
Right. And the Eagle's definitely flying high right now. Next one's one we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. It's Cat Collector. This is the 2 and a white 3/2 that makes a food when it ETBs, and the first time you gain life on each of your turns, you get a 1/1 cat. We'll talk about this one a little more deeply, but this is a fine card, right? I mean, it's a 3 mana 3/2 that makes a food and effectively another cat, you know, so think of it as like, you know, 5 mana, 3 life, 3/2, and a 1/1. Like that adds up pretty decently, and it's spread out. And then it just sits there as a payoff, primarily for the white-black deck, which is the context under which we're going to talk about it on the podcast today. But this is one of the better payoffs for that deck. I mean, if you have repeatable ways to gain life, it just spits out 1/1s basically every turn.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where we have cards that are build-arounds, right? Where you need to have A plus B to make it work. You need the Healer's Hawk to make the Ajani's Pridemate work, for example. This is a card that, at the very least, it's a 3 mana 3/2 that just generates you a food. That's already just a card you're going to play.
Definitely.
But you turn that food into a 1/1. You play some life gain lands. Like the fact that this just triggers off of random incidental life gain as well just makes this really, really, really solid. It's one of the best uncommons in the set. And I think it's a really, really close call between this and the more powerful Eagle, right? The Eagle is more powerful if you do end up in blue-white, but this is powerful enough where you could make the case to take this card because this will always be a solid card in your deck and it's a monocolored card.
Right. You could go multiple different directions. Unfortunately, Paul, I think you'll agree, but definitely for me, we have a very clear pick at rare here. It's Curator of Destinies. 4 blue, 5/5 flying, can't be countered. And when it enters, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, separate them into a face down pile and a face up pile, and then your opponent gets to keep a pile that you put in your hand. The rest go in your graveyard. This card's dope.
This card's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we can probably have a 30-minute section on how to properly do these Curator of Destiny splits because it's hard.
It is hard.
It is tough. Right.
I always start down the road of like, all right, let's do a good split. Let's figure it out. And then I get like probably what would end up being about halfway through the process. And I'm like, close enough. Like there's 3 in one and 2 in the other. And like,
you're like, do I show 2? Do I show 3?
Right.
Right. If you show 3 and it's a big game in of itself. But at the end of the day, this is a 6 mana 5/5 that at least gets you 2 cards.
Right.
Which is incredible. Absolutely incredible. I talked about how if you're going to pay 6 mana for something, it better do something when it enters the battlefield. Well, this one is one of the best ones. This card is awesome.
Definitely. Yeah, this would be the pick. I played against this card once, and I played the most dangerous game, Paul. I tried to bounce it to like encourage my opponent to deck themselves because I didn't have any like actual removal. Yeah. And I'm like, it is 5 cards per cast, right? Like they're going to turn through. Problem. Right. Within those cards, they found the way to win the game pretty easily. Yeah, so that didn't work. But also, I was just going to die to it in the air, so I didn't have much of a choice. I would slam Curator of Destinies here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, easy. We got an easy one there. Okay, I want you to touch. So over the course of the weekend, 2 very cool things happened. One of them is that you qualified for the Arena Championship. So give us the quick story on that, because that was constructed, but just people care.
Yeah, no. So it almost just never happened. So basically the qualifier weekend was this weekend, and the format for the event was standard. And if you finish in the top 250 of either limited or constructed, you automatically qualify for this event. But additionally, this weekend was the kind of Arena Direct Win Foundations Boxes event. So my plan going into the weekend was, well, I'm just going to I'm just going to pump out a bunch of Win-A-Box videos. That'll be my content that I make, and it'll be fine. But I made a few videos, and then Saturday I wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and I turn up Arena trying to do another video, and I go, and it's just staring at me. And I just can't turn down value because it's a free entry, right? It's a free entry, Marshall. I know I can win boxes, but this is a free entry where if I get some number of wins, I get free gems. And you know what I can do with those gems, Marshall? Turn them into more boxes.
Yeah.
Or drafts, whatever. So you know what? So I looked at that and I was like, you know what? Let's just I'm somewhat like, we just cast the World Championship last month. I'm still pretty aware of what's in standard. So let's give this a shot. So I just took a Golgari mid-range deck because that's a deck that doesn't require that as long as you know how to sequence spells, it can kind of pay you off. So I just copied a Golgari mid-range deck. I was like, sweet, I get to play Llanowar Elves. I expect a lot of mono red. This is probably a decent choice for my skill set. And I went with it. And then all of a sudden, I was just trying to make content out of this. And I was like, oh my gosh, I made day 2. I went 7-1.
That is incredible.
And I was like, all right, great. I made day 2. This is more. I've never made day 2 of one of these. Let's just keep running. Let's just run it back. You can choose a different deck, but I was like, let's just run it back. I made one small change because I played against 6 mono red decks game 1, so I added a Scavenging Ooze to my main, and then we went 6-1. So just out of nowhere, with basically no preparation, I managed to rattle off a bunch of wins. And if anybody watches those videos, I definitely didn't play perfect, but played the best that I could. And still managed to get there. So yeah, now I'm queued for the Arena Championship. If I win that one, that's $30K and an invite to the World Championship. So a lot on the line for that one. So it's pretty exciting to just be qualified for something. I haven't qualified for something this big in like 8 years. So it was just cool to be able to actually have some success in Constructed because I never played those.
Man, congrats. That is incredible. The bar that they set for those, I can see how whittled down that field gets. I mean,
right.
That record you need. So what did you end up going on the weekend?
13-2. In best of 3. This is best of 3
and that's
matches.
Like full matches. Yeah. Wow. Nice job, dude. That is an incredible run, especially considering that, you hadn't been concentrating on Constructed. I mean, Paul's had a lot of success in Constructed over his professional career. So it's not shocking to me, but that's when you're testing, right? That's when you're like, okay, I'm going to understand this format. I'm going to really learn a deck. Instead, you were like, this one looks cool. And banged it out. That's really impressive, man. Great work. When is that?
I don't actually know.
Okay. Yeah. Like yeah. Said, that's what happens.
This was very last minute. I wasn't even entirely sure what I was playing for other than I clicked on the thing and it said I could win gems. So I said, okay, well, I'll just play this for the gems and see what happens. Not expecting to actually win the thing. And then, of course, just the wins just kept piling up, and we just kind of went with it.
And people can watch you do this?
Yeah. So my day 1 video went out yesterday, and then my day 2 video went out today,
Monday.
So so this exactly. It went out on Monday. So everything is out there on the YouTubes to watch. So you get to watch all the punts with me and all the glory as well.
Oh man, that's some high stakes stuff. That's really cool. So, there's of course a link to Paul's YouTube channel down in the description as well if you want to check out those videos. Now, you also though did get to play some of these Win-A-Box events, which I didn't get to play. These were sealed foundations, right?
Yes, I got to play. I wanted to play more. I actually just wanted to. I kind of made time for the weekend to play a bunch of those, but then this silly little tournament got in the way of things. Yeah. But I did manage to win a couple, or I guess each time you win, you get 2 boxes. So I guess I won 4 boxes. Would have liked to win more because my plan was to just kind of stack them up behind me over here. But I'm sure there's going to be plenty more Arena Direct events to go.
You wanted a Paul Cheon size stack of...
Oh, yeah, that would be amazing, just like this high.
Yeah.
But, which isn't that tall to begin with. But anyways,
well,
it's going to be, it's going to, I definitely had some learnings going into this just because it doesn't really play out like draft at all. And oftentimes you're leaning into certain archetypes.
Yeah. So let's talk about that real quick because you did get a chance to play some sealed and there's an Arena Open coming up this coming weekend, which I know, me and I'm assuming, and a bunch of our listeners are going to want to be playing in. And so I did want to get your take, since you did do, what did you say, 5 or 6 sealeds or whatever, what were your takeaways from it? Are there any adjustments that you'd make if you've primarily drafted, like I assume most of us have, and they're looking to jump into sealed? What are some of the things that stood out?
Yeah, so one of the things that stood out, and it shouldn't really come as a shock, is just often I ended up either white or black. And that's just based on the sheer depth of the commons, right? White and black are the two deepest in terms of how many solid playable cards you'll get. Black, you will often be just because you have 3 amazing removal spells, right? You have Eaten Alive, Stab, and Bake into a Pie. And it's really, really important in sealed deck to have answers to your opponent's bombs, because what everybody looks to do, and I do the same thing, and you're probably going to do the same thing, is the first thing you do when you open a sealed deck, look at your rares, right? Look at your bombs and kind of try to build your deck around those cards because they have such a huge impact on your win rate. You try to build around it as long as you had the depth for it. So at the same time, you want to make sure that you have the proper removal to kind of to put yourself in a situation where you can have the answer for your opponent's powerful cards. And specifically white and black were the 2 of the deeper colors, oftentimes together, just because I would not be able to find enough playables, because in this set, there's just a lot of commons that are kind of D-level commons. And for that reason, sometimes you had some pretty rough sealed decks.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably just going to be true for most like core set style things.
Absolutely. So I kind of have an order of operations for what I typically tend to do when I do my sealed decks. And obviously you can do it any number of ways, but obviously the first thing you do, and this is a minor tangent, I don't know if they're ever going to do this, but Arena, you're holding a lot of these sealed deck events. Please put in a button that I can press to sort everything by color, right? Because what I want to do is have a column view of every color, just the way everybody does it at their pre-release. I want to be able to press a button so that they're all lined up. If that exists, and I don't know about it, because I have to manually do everything, but what I do is I lay everything out by color. I look at my bombs, right? I sort things by color. Then I look at the depth of the colors, right? If I don't have enough playables, if I only have like 6 playables in a color, it's also nice because you can immediately discount that color, and then you start working with your builds. Once I do that, I also check my mana fixing, right? I look at my lands to see what are the potential splashes, because you can't just play 7/7/3 and try to get away with it. Well, you can, but you're going to have a tough time. But any additional Dismal Backwater or whatever tap land you have opens a possibility for you to play a more powerful deck, which is often the strategy that you need to take when you play sealed. Things slow down. You want to go for maximum power. Oftentimes we have effects like 5 mana, draw 3 cards. Right. You're like, probably not too good in limited because just it's too fast. Well, in sealed, 5 mana, draw 3 cards is excellent because you don't get to choose your mana curve. You just get what you open, and what that means is you're not going to be able to draft or have the perfect white-red deck with 7 2-drops, 2 healers, hawks, and a bunch of combat tricks, right? That's just rare. So because you're not going to get run over as often, the slower cards, the 2-for-1s, cards like that go up in value.
Okay.
Then I build out my deck. I look at all the different color combinations, and then I look at 2 big things. How much removal I have, right? Because it's so important to be able to answer the bombs. Everybody's going to play their bombs. Right. Sometimes maybe they shouldn't, but they will. They go, I have this Planeswalker. I'm going to play it no matter what. So make sure you have your removal and then my curve, right? And those 2 things have to line up. And, like I said, if things are slower, but if you have no 2-drops, you probably shouldn't be playing that color combination. Right.
You still have to have some semblance of a curve when you can. Yeah.
Exactly. So you try to find the combination where you have a respectable curve. You don't need an insane curve. You don't need 7 2-drops, right? In modern limited, you do need 5 or 6 things to do on turn 2. In sealed, that's not always the case, but make sure you have some, and then just make sure you play the color combination that gives you a solid number of interactions. I always want to make sure that I have 4 to 5 ways to kill things if possible. And sometimes I'll splash if I have to, if my mana allows me. Like splashing for removal is something that you sometimes need to do. I had a blue-black seal deck where I had 2 removal spells, and I was like, well, this is rough.
Right.
Like, how am I going to win? And I was like, well, I have a Burst Lightning and a Fiery Annihilation. and I have 2 Evolving Wilds and a black-red dual land. I'm like, all right, I'll do it.
Get in there. Yeah.
I got to get it in. And if that doesn't work, if somehow you're super unlucky and you don't have any removal, then try to find the best proactive strategy that you can put together. Because your pool just wasn't good enough, you didn't have enough removal spells. Then you start looking at your white and red cards or your white and green cards, looking at your combat tricks and go, okay, can I just play the deck that has the most number of 2-drops and tricks and kill my opponent before they can get set up? That's kind of the way that I do things when I try to go through the sealed deck process.
Yeah, I think that the big picture too, that you're touching on here as well, is that especially when it comes to the curve considerations and the backup plan of jumping to a more aggressive, assertive deck if you can, is that while sealed is definitely slower than draft on average, it's still subject to the same card quality and average power level stuff that draft is, where most of the creatures, almost every creature is still playable. There's not that many Aegis turtles floating around. Most of them are just like, yeah, I have power toughness and I do something. And as long as a person has those in their deck and is casting them, they are going to be affecting the board. They are going to be building out some type of a game plan. You don't run into these train wrecks that often anymore in either sealed or draft. So don't overdo it. Right? You still have to do things. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to play all these card draw spells and no 2-drops. And, it's a long, slow game and we're fine. It's not like that. You get a little bit of a reprieve. There's a few things that get better. And the format tends to be more bomb centric, as Paul laid out. And that's why we lean on like counter spells more so in sealed than we normally would, even though they're actually pretty good in the draft format here. So there's not a big difference there, but there's a lot of formats where there's like a cancel variant that's printed and it effectively sees no play in draft, or very like maybe one every once in a while type thing where you'll happily put it in your deck in sealed deck because you need answers for bombs. They just go unchecked too often because, as Paul said, everybody plays every bomb they can possibly put in their deck, period. That is the norm. That is what you'll see every single time. Even if it's a bad idea, they will put that card in there. Even if it's a double colored card and they're going to try to splash it, they'll try to put that card in there. And you do need to meet those because look, when that player doesn't get their mana together, you get a win. I mean, if you just cast your spells, you're going to beat that player. But when they do, you have to have an answer for it, for their bombs. So yeah, keep that in mind. Good luck to everybody at the Arena Open. Next week we will be. Are you going to be able to play it, Paul? I don't know if you've got holiday stuff going on or. Yeah,
I mean, my dad and my sister are coming for almost the entire week, but they're leaving on Saturday, and I'm going to have to help push them out the door, just because the arena opens on Saturday. So I'm like, hey, we had breakfast. I got to record some of this arena stuff.
Yeah,
but my plan is to.
Breakfast is at 7, Dad.
Arena Open Greater Sign Family. No, but the thing is, they're coming down on Tuesday, so they're going to be here for quite a few days.
So they might be sick of you by then.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Kick them out the door. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm planning on playing as well, and hopefully we'll get that money. Quick check in on a couple of things for Foundations before we call it a show for the week. The first one is I mentioned it before, but I did do a quick check on 17 lands for how the archetypes were doing in the last week. I feel that the first week is mayhem, basically, on Arena, right? We're talking about most people playing best of one, many, many more inexperienced players in the field. And to me, that tends to push up aggressive decks. Like, we don't really get a chance to figure out what, blue-green does week one in most formats, because people are just curving out and smashing, and everybody that's messing around with stupid stuff that doesn't affect the board or try and build arounds or just doesn't know what they're doing at all, with regards to building their deck or their mana bases or their curves or anything that we talk about on this show. They just tend to get ran over by people who are just playing creatures with power and toughness, combat tricks, or removal spells. So I feel like it skews a little bit more towards those type of decks. So I took a look just at the last week to see how the archetypes were shaping up. And two things jumped out. First, excuse me, I need a little spindrift here, Paul. This is an unofficial drink of the show. Luis drinks spindrift on the show forever.
Fair enough.
Two things jumped out Well, what do you got in that cup? What's in there? Coffee?
The Seattle Starbucks cup. I'm no longer
Oh,
there.
nice.
Yeah,
it's like a tourist cup for you now.
Yeah, exactly. So every time I go to a pro tour or whatever, my wife always wants me to grab a Starbucks cup just so it's from a place where I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm no longer in Seattle, so now I can drink out of it.
That's a tear to my eye reminder. That's brutal. Two things jumped out about the archetypes. One is that they're very close together. This is shaping up to be a flat format in the sense of there isn't a runaway or a super far behind archetype. And I think that's really good. I mean, so far, Foundations is checking all the boxes that you would hope a core set or a base level set would do. And this is one of them, that there isn't some huge error that has happened where one color is just horrendous. We've talked about green and bashed it a little bit, but you can totally play it. It's not like it's, unplayable jank or anything. Like, just as an example, the current best deck, according to this, is Azorius. So that's blue-white. And if you go down to the fifth best deck, that's Celestia. So we swap out a blue for green in this scenario. And what do you lose? 1.1%. That's it. And all of the decks, there's 3 decks in between those two are in between those, as far as win percentage goes, average win percentage. So, we're not talking about, some huge gaps. The other thing that stood out about this list is that there are 3 decks that are significantly behind, where the first 7 are very, very closely grouped. The difference between number 1 and number 7 is 1.5% total. Then there is a significant fall off where it goes down from that bottom one, another 2%, 2.1% down, and it goes down from there. Those ones, just so you know, at least, again, this is a 1-week sample early in the format, so we don't want to go too crazy, but this is a snapshot, is blue-red, black-green, and blue-green. Those are the ones that are struggling. And you'll notice that 2 of those do have green in it, which is part of the reason why we're, down on green a little bit. And then blue-red, man, it's always this. It's always blue-green. It's always blue-red. That either is too good and kind of is like really great, or it's just misses. And once again, we have a miss for blue-red and we have a miss for green-blue. And these ones, again, make up the lower tier. But if you were to group this format into tiers, sometimes they break down into multiple tiers. This one is just 2. That's it. There's everything in that upper 7/10 and then the last 3 decks. So to me, that's a good sign. I mean, and it's worth noting here that even if you go top to bottom, worst deck in the format to best using this data, it is still only 4% different between worst deck and best. That is still like, some deck has to be worst, right? Like, you can't have everything be 54.2% or whatever the average win rate of the average 17 lands user is. That's not going to happen. That, they are paired against each other and they're going to have some stratification there. This is a good outcome. I mean, you would take this like straight up if you were designing the set, right, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, this is about as good of a spread as you can hope for, right? You're just never going to be able to nail it perfectly. And I'm sure at the end of every set, there's always a card or 2 that you're like, well, I kind of wish I added an extra toughness to this one, or I really wish this thing cost 1 less, or something along those lines. But I mean, as far as the spread of win rates, you can't really ask for too much better than what we have here. We don't have a crazy outlier where just this one archetype is significantly better than anything else. And like you said, the gap is just so low where you can kind of just do anything. Obviously, you don't want to go into a draft wanting to draft Izzet or Golgari or Simic. But at the same time, if it's open, right? If the uncommons are still available, you can still draft those archetypes, because we talked about how in the last week, everybody was leaning into the Esper colors was the most powerful things people could be doing. And also, if you look at the data here, it's also the most overdrafted. Those 3 archetypes, white, blue, blue, white, and blue, black, are the 3 most commonly played archetypes.
Yep.
And they still have respectable win rates. So that's telling me that it's overdrafted, but still able to succeed. But because they're overdrafted, it's now opened the door for other color combinations to thrive. I mean, look at Gruul. Red and green are not considered to be the 2 best color combinations, but when it's open, because it's not drafted highly, it's drafted almost it's drafted about half as often as blue white, right? But if it's open and it's available, it's the second best archetype in the format, just from the small sample size.
Yeah,
and it works.
The 4 power thing matters. It actually works.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this is just a great spread. I have my archetypes that I still prefer, and that's largely the controlling, blue black control and blue white to me are still king. That's the way that I like to draft the format. But it's nice to see that you can have success with a lot of these archetypes, because I know that when you showed me this, it kind of surprised me, just because there are some archetypes that I don't really look to be in, but now I might need to consider them, just because, I don't like drafting Selesnya, right? I don't really particularly like drafting Gruul, but now it's based off of this. It's, well, if you can put together good combination of cards, you'll still be able to pull it off.
For sure. And this is where the format starts to get interesting, right? Because we've kind of established what the good decks are, what the good colors are, but they designed this set such that none of them are out of the running completely. And so we'll see things like this Gruul deck kind of bubble its way to the top. And then, we'll see if people adjust and how that goes from here. The one deck I did want to kind of drill into a little bit was the Orzhov, the white-black Lifegain deck, because it is drafted, at least in the last week, it was the most drafted deck, period. And again, I think that's an artifact of what you talked about earlier, Paul, where these are 2 very deep colors and they're kind of the obvious colors, right? Like if you open up a pack and let's say there's no good bomb rare, you will often find a very good common or uncommon black or white card, just like, oh yeah, I'll take this one. That's a good card. Oh, bacon to a pie. Great. I'll take that. Oh, I got a stab. Okay, cool. Oh, Helpful Hunter. Oh, these are just obvious cards, I guess, that are good. And I could see how you could just sort of take the best card out of the first few picks and just end up in black, white a lot. They're also the deepest, so they support the most players at the table. So that all makes sense. But I have found the actual black, white deck to be not very good. I haven't been able to make it where I've really felt like, oh, this thing's a hammer, right? Like I have this weapon that like I expect to get to 7 wins with. Whenever I draft it, even if it's a good version, and I did think that, I was wrong. I was like, well, this deck's fine and you can put it together. And I have some thoughts on it and I wanted to get yours as well. Big picture. Let's just talk about the deck. It's a life gain deck. It gives you bonuses for having gained life, basically. And that brings up a question, which is just, is this archetype fundamentally flawed? Because here's how it plays out. There's, as with many synergy-based decks, there's enablers and there's payoffs, right? It has this kind of fundamental build where there's a payoff and an enabler, and you need both of them on the battlefield, and most of the time they're 2 creatures, right? Here's the problem. I mentioned it before, but I think Foundations has one of the best removal suites we've really seen recently. Just there are answers for everything and every color gets good removal. And that makes it really easy to break up 2 creature combos. If you need both of them to be on the battlefield over the course of a few turns to get the real synergies going, that's not going to happen very often because people see that and they will break it up. Even with the depth of cards in here. And what I see happening is that people do break up the actual life gain combos, but given the depth of commons and uncommons in this color pair, you still have a playable deck, right? Like if I have a Healer's Hawk and a Johnny's Pridemate and they kill my Pridemate, it's not like the Healer's Hawk's is 0. Right? If they kill my Healer's Hawk and I have a Pridemate that picked up a +1/+1 counter or could down the line, that's not a 0. We opened Cat Collector in one of our Crack-A-Packs, right? And you said, look, just on its face, it's already a totally fine card, right? I don't have to have, a Vampire Nighthawk or a Dazzling Angel to go with it to make that thing awesome. It does. Like, it does make it really good when it's spitting out a cat every turn or whatever, but like, it's okay on its own. And if I told you, that I have a Vampire Nighthawk, is that a bad card on its own? Heck no, it's a really good card on its own. So all of these are like good enough on their own, but you really do lose the synergies if the people break up the combos. And I think that that's what's happening, is that it's just really hard to keep these things rolling where multiple turns of triggers and activations can get going. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you kind of outlined there, where a lot of people are looking at approaching black white as the life gain deck, and as a result, they're prioritizing the life gain payoff cards. And I don't think that's the actual correct approach to have success with black white. And I think when people make that adjustment, they can start winning more, just because we have mentioned how white and black are the two deepest colors in the set, where you can have a bunch of good cards in your deck and be successful. White and black have the best removal spells. You have Helpful Hunter, you have Dazzling Angel. Those are just great creatures. And if you approach it that way, where you just take a bunch of the good cards and put together a deck, that works. Where you start falling off, and where I think a lot of people kind of start sabotaging themselves, is they just look at cards that say gain life or gain life payoff and just take them and play them all. And that's the mistake, right? Because you're justifying playing bad cards in your deck because of the quote unquote synergies, and the payoffs aren't even all that strong, right? It's not like these are game winning synergies. And the thing is, all the good payoffs are uncommon anyways. They're just not even a good common payoff. The thing is, people are tricking themselves into playing Marauding Blight Priest in their black-white life gain deck. It's like, oh, turn 1 Healer's Hawk, turn 3 Blight Priest, I'm going off. No, you're not. You played a 3-mana 3/2. Right? Or I'm going to jam 3 Sanguine Siphoners, because then on turn 4, I'm going to play a Vanguard Seraph, and then I'll be able to surrender. It's like you're putting 2 not-so-great cards in your deck. The Seraph a little better, of course, but you're playing 2 not-so-great cards in your deck to be able to trigger all these life gain bonuses. And that is not the approach that you need to be taking. What you do is just take all the good black and white cards, and you win off of the sheer card quality of your cards, and not really focus too much on the life gain stuff. And I think you'll have a lot more success.
Yeah, that's been, and you know, that's also one of the, so I would break it down in the biggest picture, like if you haven't played this yet, into kind of what is good and what is bad, right? And what is good is that it has a broad base of playables, which means that your deck's almost never a train wreck, like, because you don't have cards that individually do nothing and require synergies. It's just they're much better when you synergize them. So it's relatively high floor type deck, with a bit of a bonus available to you. But as Paul outlined, you're not ever really popping off where you're just like, oh my God, like I did it, right? I did the thing. It has to be there for multiple turns. And then even then you're only getting incremental advantage as you go. But that's what's bad about the deck, is that it's easy to disrupt. And then what I found as well is that since many of these creatures that are doing this whole thing are small, right? Like, think about the cards that we just named, right? A Johnny's Pridemate's 2 power with no help. Cat Collector is a 3/2, right? Fiendish Panda is like kind of hard to cast 4-drop. Blight Priest is a 3/2. 3/2 is like exactly where you don't want to be in this format. 3-mana 3/2 is just like the worst thing you could do. I put Elenda, Saint of Dusk on the payoffs list, but that's a rare and kind of exempt from most of this stuff. You know, and then the enablers, Healer's Hawk, tiny. Dazzling Angel, good size. That's fine. Felidar Savior is fine in that way too. Sanguine Siphoner, just a weak card overall. You know, and Paul, we forgot about the gain lands, right? For enablers. Yep. So boom. But you know, a lot of these are, you know, 2 and 3 mana cards basically. And what that I found is that if your opponent knows what's going on, breaks up your mini combos, you often don't have the best long-term game plan, right? Because you don't have blue to like fuel you with cards or a Sphinx or something that just powers you through the late game. You're top decking a lot of a Johnny's Pridemate. And it's like, okay, if I don't have this going right from the early, like, look, yes, Healer's Hawk into Pridemate is disgusting. It is awesome, right? But if you draw a turn 5 Pridemate and you don't have any way to trigger it, or a turn 5 Pridemate and you have like one way to trigger it, like a gain land, that's just okay. That's not that great. You know, a Cat Collector is a decent card, but it's not a hammer, right? And as you mentioned, Blight Priest is just more a trap than anything else. So sometimes you can feel like I did the thing and I still lost, or I'm doing the thing and it's not really getting me to where I need to go.
Yeah, I think the way that you should approach the black-white deck is more of a mid-range, almost controlling deck, because you have access to so much good removal, right? You have Luminous Rebuke, Banishing Light, and then of course the 3 black common removal spells. Kill a bunch of things. You're not really an aggro deck unless you can get a bunch of Healer's Hawks and the Angels, right? Obviously, if you can do that, that's pretty solid. But one card that really stood out to me that's been a super overperformer in the black-white decks is Squad Rallier. And if you actually look at the win rate on Squad Rallier, it's actually insane. For top players, it's the 6th best common in black-white.
Wow.
Right. It's got a higher win rate than Luminous Rebuke or Eaten Alive. I wouldn't take it over those cards, but it's just notes. It just shows you that like you mentioned, black-white doesn't have the ability to go long. This is your ability to go long. This is the card that you take as kind of your finisher. You play this, and then you kind of use this to kind of continue getting value off of all those small creatures that you outlined before.
Yeah. Yeah. What I expect from black-white going forward is that it occupies that middle ground of archetypes. It's not, I don't think it will end up being one of the top archetypes, but I don't think it'll ever fall down below the top 5 or something like that, because the card quality is just too high. And this is a, core level-ish set where just raw power level counts. And it has a really good mix of creatures, removal spells, and enough synergies that can give you a few bonuses here and there that you're good. But you summed it up perfectly, Paul. I would not think of this as the straight up life gain, blah, blah, blah deck. This is just a black-white deck that plays good cards and occasionally gets bonuses for life gain. But I'm not putting cards in my deck that are just like, oh, this gains 1 life and therefore, I'm gonna go off. That has not been the case. It's too easy to break up. The good news is that you just get a bunch of super good cards to lean back on, and that to me will carry this deck regardless.
Yeah, I agree. Just stop first picking a Johnny's Pride Mate and thinking you're going to have just the most insane life gain deck ever, right? You can first pick Cat Collector. That card's just good and it generates a lot of value, but just these random things that you think are going to be great, just put a lower priority on the life gain stuff and just focus on just putting good cards into your deck. And like you said, it's just so easy to fall into black-white just because more often than not, 4th pick, the best card in the pack is going to be black or white.
Yes.
Just based on the Burst Lightning is going to be gone. Yep. The Llanowar Elf will probably be gone, and you're going to see a Burglar Rat or a Helpful Hunter just staring at you, and you're like, well, it's going to be this or a Courageous Goblin. And you're like, well, I'm just going to take this over the Courageous Goblin every time. And that's how just people just fall into the deck where you're just like, okay, I have. And that's the one hard thing too, though. It's hard to know if black-white is open or not, right? Mm-hmm. And that also leads to people having much worse decks because since the colors are so deep, the person passing to you could be in black-white and you're still getting the 2nd or 3rd best commons out of those packs. And you still believe that color combination might be open. So just be mindful. Just keep track of some of the uncommons that you're seeing. If you're never seeing a black or white uncommon and you're seeing a bunch of commons, like it's possible that you're still being cut off there.
It's really interesting. One last thought. You mentioned about how much better Squad Rallier is doing in that particular deck. That probably just answers that question I had about, or that concern I had about late game. Right? Like I was saying, you run out of gas. You just don't if you have a Squad Rallier. Where in a normal white deck, Squad Rallier is like a playable. Like it's it's a slow kind of clunky, not, card, but that really does fill a need that black-white particularly has, which is to power itself into the late game. And you don't miss. You don't miss with Squad Rallier and black-white.
Yeah. Here's like a thing that this will probably increase your win rate at least maybe 0.5%. Mm-hmm. If you have the choice between putting Vanguard Seraph and the Rallier in your black-white deck, just play the Rallier almost every time.
Yeah.
And it'll just be way, way better for you in most instances. And right now, people just probably aren't doing that because they're like, oh, 4-mana, 3/3 flyer. I got some life gain stuff. I'm going to surveil and I'm going to go nuts. It's like, no, the 3/4 body is really nice. And this is the tool that you're going to use to play so many dinky little creatures where eventually you can just overrun them.
Yes,
right?
That's right. Yeah. So there you go. Enjoy your 0.5% on your friends from Limited Resources if you will only commit to making this one small change. That's going to do it for the show this week. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Paul is Houmph pretty much everywhere. You can find Paul's YouTube channel down in the show notes below. Make sure you check out his daily draft videos, except for when he's qualifying for major tournaments online, in which case he will occasionally pick up a 60-card deck when forced to, but most of the time it's daily draft videos from Paul on his YouTube. Make sure you check that out. I want to thank our sponsor, Ultimate Guard for supporting the show. If you need to pick up any gifts for anybody, make sure you head on over to Ultimate Guard, check out what they've got. And again, you can pick up your favorite stuff at your favorite online retailer or local game store. Thanks, Ultimate Guard, for your support of the show. And thank you to our patrons. We really appreciate you supporting us all this time. It means a lot. And yeah, thank you for that. That's going to do it for the show this week. We'll see you next time. Paul, do you have a sign off? I don't have one.
Well, I'm hosting a Thanksgiving dinner now for the very first time.
Oh, it's at your place.
I have no idea what to do. So I've just before I moved to Vegas and actually rented a pretty large house, I've always just lived in apartments. So I've never really had a place big enough to kind of support a bunch of people. But now that I live in Vegas and I have a lot of family based out of Los Angeles, they're like, hey, they just all thought it was a good idea that I host.
Let's go to Paul's.
So everybody's coming over here. We're going to have like 15 people here. And immediately after this, I'm going to make a nice trip over to Costco and just try to figure out on the fly what it is I'm going to need. So, I mean, we have, we're going to do the turkey and everything. And it's a little scary just because we kind of don't want to embarrass ourselves. We want to make it so that it's like, hey, yeah, maybe we can come over here, but at the same time, it's a lot, and I know it's going to be stressful.
Definitely. You know who you need to ask is Luis. I mean, he's an absolute beast at this stuff. Yeah,
I can't though. I'm not that person.
Yeah, I know, but you just tell him, dude, I need you to translate this for me, right? Like where I'm hitting this skill level of cooking. I'm not going to be out there like smoking a turkey for 17 hours or whatever nonsense Luis is doing. And, and have him like cherry pick, the simplest but best recipes, so that you can fill out that table. Yeah.
I mean, we're going to have a ton of food. My aunt's going to come. She's going to bring a bunch of her awesome Korean food. She's going to bring her things. So we're going to have some fusion, right? There's going to be some turkey.
What's the number one? What's her best dish? Oh yeah. Some
her kalbi. Her kalbi. It's amazing. She always brings 2 10 to 15 pound tubs of just marinated short rib. Right. And then she's got these, it's called pindatok, which is just these pan fried, like mung bean cakes kind of almost. Yeah. But yeah, those are amazing. Sometimes she makes the japchae. You probably know what the japchae is. It's like this stir-fried noodle thing. So she's going to bring a bunch of stuff. Then we're going to have the turkey and the mashed potatoes. It's going to be great.
Dude, that sounds so good.
I know. And here's the thing. Worst case scenario, if somehow the food ends up all being horrible or whatever, we can just all drive over to Bacchanal.
Yeah, totally. Just get in line over there. Yeah.
There you go.
Dude, kalbi plus mashed potatoes, like
nobody's gonna eat the turkey, right?
That's gonna hit.
Like
who's gonna be really
eat the turkey when you have kalbi there? So I'm excited, and I'll be taking most of this week off to kind of prepare for all the family stuff, but really, really excited for it. It's a great time of year, and really excited to be closer to my family. One of the main reasons why I moved out to Las Vegas, and yeah, it should be really fun.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to all of our U.S. based listeners and Jeff.